This is undoubtedly the most absurd scene in judicial history. The suspect desperately tried to prove his guilt. The police, prosecutors, and court instead desperately defended him, to the extent that he angrily shouted in court, "The person was clearly the one who murdered me. Why can't it be attributed to me?" The reason for such an absurd scene appearing is all because of an innocent young man wrongfully killed 30 years ago, just because of a blue mountain bike. He was branded with the accusation of being a rapist. It took only 7 months from his arrest to his execution. It wasn't until 10 years later, when the real culprit was caught, that the case took a shocking turn. Date: August 5, 1994. Location: Shijiazhuang City, Hebei Province. That afternoon, the local hydraulic parts factory worker, Kang Lan, mysteriously disappeared after work. Her anxious family searched everywhere, but she remained vanished without a trace. It wasn't until 6 days later that they found it in the cornfield on the western outskirts of the village. I witnessed the most undesired scene of my life. The lush green cornfield was vibrant with life. A gentle breeze brushed through like a softly swaying veil. However, beneath this beautiful scenery lay a highly decomposed and foul-smelling female body. The woman's clothes had been completely removed. After identification by the family, the deceased was confirmed to be Kang Lan, who had been missing for days. The police initially concluded that this should be a roadside rape and murder case. The incident likely occurred at around 5 p.m. on August 5, 1994. The police, through interviews with nearby villagers, obtained a lead on a suspect. A report from the public indicated that since the beginning of summer, a young man in his 20s had often been seen loitering around, following women who were going to the restroom. The informant clearly remembered that the individual was riding a blue mountain bike. It was based on this blue mountain bike that the local police managed, in just 1 month, they captured the murderer. And this so-called murderer is Nia Shubin. Nia Shubin was born in Xian village, Luchuan City, Shijiazhuang. He was a worker at a machinery factory. He was arrested by the police on September 23, 1994. And he was not yet 20 years old. The main evidence for his arrest by the police was that he also owned a blue mountain bike. When his mother, Zhang Huanji, learned that her son was arrested, she instantly felt as if struck by lightning, like the sky was falling down. On the 6th day after his arrest, the police finally extracted Nia Shubin's confession. He admitted that he was the murderer in the cornfield case on the western outskirts of Shijiazhuang. Based solely on this confession, the Shijiazhuang Intermediate Court convicted him in a first trial on March 15, 1995. Nia Shubin was then sentenced to death. The Hebei High Court's second trial also upheld the original verdict. It's important to note that the police were at the crime scene at that time. No evidence related to fingerprints or footprints was collected at all, nor was any DNA testing conducted. A single confession can result in a death sentence. This has always been unreasonable, regardless of the time period. The news was like a bolt from the blue. It was hard for Nia Shubin's parents to accept. The mother, Zhang Huanji, believed that her child had been introverted and timid since a young age. He didn't even dare to touch a sick old hen. She couldn't believe her son could commit such a crime. The elderly couple always firmly believed in their son, that one day, he would regain his freedom. However, on April 28, 1995, Nia's father went to the prison as usual to bring clothes for his son. Unexpectedly, he was told that he no longer needed to come, because Nia Shubin had been executed the day before. Upon hearing the terrible news, Nia's father collapsed to the ground. However, regarding a human life, the judicial authorities did not even notify the family. What's even more infuriating is that after the incident, Nia Shubin's parents repeatedly requested their son's body. They were even mocked by a judge named Meng at the time. Do you know what that judge said? "Oh, why do you still want his body?" I said, "That's my son." Later, he said, "I'll give you a certificate for this. You can go to the crematorium to collect the ashes." I came back with a handful of my son's ashes. At that time, I really couldn't take it anymore. At the crematorium entrance, calling for help from heaven and earth yielded no response. The news of losing their son plunged Nia's father into deep sorrow. The following year, he swallowed an entire bottle of sleeping pills. Fortunately, he was rescued and out of danger. But from then on, he was left disabled in both legs. 10 years passed in the blink of an eye. Nya Shubin's parents have been trapped in the grief of their son's death ever since. The two elderly people couldn't understand. On what grounds did the court declare, without evidence, that their son was a criminal? Yet the officials involved in the case have long since been promoted because of it. No one cared whether Nya Shubin was wronged or not. It wasn't until 2005, when a report emerged, people finally remembered that young man who had been wrongfully accused. On the eve of the 2005 Spring Festival, during an inspection operation in Xinjiang County, Hunan Province, they discovered a suspicious man, a migrant worker surnamed Wang who appeared suspicious. This person, nicknamed Big Wang, ran as soon as he saw the police. He never returned home during holidays. His fellow workers only knew he was from Hebei. They had no other information about him. After several rounds of questioning by the police, this person's mouth was finally pried open. He said his name was Wang Shujin. During the period from 1993 to 1995, he had actually committed 6 rapes in Hebei, and assaulted 4 victims. A few casually dropped words left the interrogator stunned. His first words were that I had killed someone. At the time, I was quite surprised when he mentioned killing someone. Given the seriousness of the matter, they immediately reported to their superiors. Later, the one in charge of investigating Wang Shujin was. It was Zheng Chengyue, deputy director of the Guangping County Public Security Bureau in Hebei Province. After understanding the situation, he took Wang Shujin to identify the crime scene. 3 of the rape cases were confirmed. The only case that occurred in Kongjai village, Shijiazhuang, was reported to have the killer executed 10 years prior. He had already been executed by gunfire. That's right, the killer who was executed was Nya Shubin. I only started to accept it then, and it made me furious at the time. How could this happen? According to Wang Shujin's confession, in the summer of 1994, he was working at a factory near the Shijiazhuang hydraulic parts factory. He often saw the victim at that time. She would pass through the dirt path in the middle of the cornfield. On August 5, Wang Shujin had sinister thoughts. He slipped out of the factory during the lunch break, lurking near the cornfield, waiting for the victim to pass by. Sure enough, it wasn't long before Kong Lan appeared riding her bicycle. As she rode by, I took a step forward. I pulled her down. After she fell, I began to strangle her. I strangled her until she passed out. After strangling her, I took her to the field. Then I hurried back to grab her bicycle. When I came back, I saw she had sat up again. As she sat up, I strangled her again until she passed out. She could no longer move. I pulled up her skirt. A murder case actually had 2 perpetrators. This not only made the Nya family feel angry, but also made Zheng Chengyue believe that Nya Shubin might have been wronged. So he reviewed the case files from that year. As a result, he was so enraged by the contents that he shook all over. At that time, the police not only failed to extract any of Nya Shubin's semen, there wasn't even a single hair or fingerprint. The only basis for convicting Nya Shubin. It was his confession. However, even this confession was full of flaws. Nya Shubin had a severe stutter. According to the criminal procedure law, the recording of the confession must be word for word. This includes documenting any stuttering. Yet, there was not a single extra word in Nya Shubin's confession. It took only 2 hours to complete thousands of words of testimony. Nya Shubin spoke even faster than I did. I watched myself talking to myself in the room. With a snap of the tape. It's definitely fake. Zheng Chengyue's father was also a victim of a wrongful conviction. He wasn't exonerated until more than a decade later. He always remembered one thing his father said. Police officers must think of the people at all times. So Zheng Chengyue decided to take care of this matter. And aside from him, there was another person who had the same idea. This person was Ma Yunlong, the deputy editor of the Hunan Business Daily. After understanding the situation, Ma Yunlong published an article titled, 2 Killers in One Case, Who is the Real Murderer? This was definitely exclusive news at the time. The fewer people who shared it, the more precious it became. But journalists of that era had their own pursuits. Unlike us, who were just focused on gaining traffic for our self-media. In order to spread the news quickly, Ma Yunlong actively gave up the chance for fame. He specifically noted on the article that free reprints were welcome. One stone stirs up 1,000 waves. Soon, hundreds of mainstream newspapers reprinted it. 1 month after the article was published. Under immense public pressure, the Hebei Provincial High People's Court finally made a statement. They decided to review the case. This finally gave hope to Nye Shubin's parents. At the same time, Zheng Chengyue and Ma Yunlong also believed the case would surely have results within a week. I told you the case would have results soon. It would be 5 days at the earliest, and at most 6 or 7 days. However, at that moment, no one expected that this result would keep them waiting for a full 11 years. For some reason, the subsequent investigation just fizzled out. And in March 2007, the Handan Intermediate People's Court of Hebei Province made a first-instance judgment on the Wang Shujin case. However, the prosecution only charged him for 3 instances of rape and murder. They made no mention of the Kong Lan case whatsoever. After that, Wang Shujin testified about the case multiple times in court. But he was interrupted by the judge on the grounds of not discussing unrelated matters. This left Wang Shujin feeling confused. He believed that this case was a significant meritorious performance. Why should they not say a word about it? In a situation where the local authorities were unaware of the facts of the crime, that I voluntarily confessed. After confessing, I said this was equivalent to turning myself in. However, the investigators believed that the evidence against Nye Shubin was conclusive. There was no possibility of any wrongful conviction. The Public Security Bureau provided evidence that he was a suspect. Then the Procuratorate issued an arrest. If the Public Security Bureau didn't have a series of evidence, it definitely isn't a. It certainly wouldn't just be one confession. They also believe that although Wang Shujin confessed voluntarily, it does not prove he is the murderer. The reason is that Wang Shujin had worked near the crime scene, so it's reasonable that he would know about the case. This incident happened on August 11th. So many people knew about this event. Where was the location? Wasn't Wang Shujin there back then? Investigators had also looked for him, so it's normal that he knew the scene. Finally, on March 12, 2007, the Handan Intermediate Court sentenced him for intentional homicide, sentencing Wang Shujin to death, but denied that he had killed Kong Lan. As soon as the news came out, Nye Shubin's parents were frantic. Because once Wang Shujin was executed, their son would never have a chance for a retrial. So, the Nye family's lawyer, Li Shuding. The case was appealed to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court requested them to provide the judgment document. Yet, it was just this single judgment document. The court never delivered it to the Nye family. The Nye family repeatedly requested it from the court but were denied. The only place to obtain the judgment document now is left with the victim Kong Lan's family. But Kong Lan's parents wished to never see the Nye family again. They definitely wouldn't help their enemy overturn the case. In order to get the judgment document, Li Shuding ran to the Kong family again and again. Even when severely scolded, he never gave up. He even took the initiative to help the Kong family defend their rights, accusing those media outlets that violated Kong Lan's privacy. Gradually, Kang's father's heart began to waver. He also wanted to find out who harmed his daughter. Finally, on April 1, 2007, Li Shuding obtained from Kang's father the judgment he has been longing for. At this moment, Li Shuding was incredibly excited. He crazily made 20 copies in one breath. Thanks to his efforts, the Supreme Court finally accepted the case. As a result, this wait lasted another 7 long years. The retrial of the case was delayed for a long time. No one knows the reason behind it. Over the long 7 years, everyone involved suffered greatly. Wang Shujin thought each time that he wouldn't make it to the Spring Festival. As a result, he slowly became the oldest person in prison. Nye Shubin's parents once said to Zheng Chengyue, "We just want to hear a word of truth from the police officer. Is my son really the murderer?" Zheng Chengyue also said to Nye Shubin's mother, "Ma'am, your son is not the murderer. Don't worry, no matter which level of leader comes to investigate me. As long as my head is still here, I will definitely tell the truth." I said, "If it's serious, then let's talk about my life. I guess I shouldn't be acting as the director then. Isn't it just like this? I'm not going against the government agencies. In fact, I'm singing the right tune." Since then, Zheng Chengyue has been continuously investigated by the Higher Disciplinary Committee. Various rumors started circulating. Ultimately, in 2009, at the age of 49, he was advised to resign from his position as deputy director. "Director Zheng, you're getting older. It's time to make way for the younger ones. I said, that's fine. I picked up my blanket and went home. Journalist Ma Yunlong was also expelled for frequently mentioning this case. The newspaper considered him a troublemaker and kicked him out. Li Shuding became even more desperate about the case. He was once so depressed that he wanted to take his own life. But after he took a walk along the Minxin River in Shijiazhuang, he gave up the thought of suicide, because he said the river water here is too foul. He is a person with a cleanliness obsession. Li Shuding said he would never forget the day the Nia family found him. Nia Shubin's mother knelt before him, asked him 6 or 7 times. He said he had a huge case and asked if he dared to take it. He also stood up and knelt before Nia's mother. He said he would take on any case as long as it wasn't an earth-shattering one. Perhaps it was this unwavering belief that led Zheng Chengyue, Ma Yunlong, Li Shuding, and others. Finally, within this impenetrable wall, they carved out a path to the light, under the immense pressure of public opinion. On June 25, 2013, the case finally entered the second trial at the Handan Intermediate Court. A rare event in judicial history also occurred in the courtroom. The roles of the prosecution and defense were reversed. Wang Shujin's lawyer acted like a traitor. He frantically tried to prove that Wang Shujin had murdered Kong Lan. Ironically, the prosecutor resembled Wang Shujin's lawyer more than he did. He tried every possible way to defend Wang Shujin. In the end, the court still denied that Wang Shujin harmed Kong Lan. The reason is that there were mistakes in the details of his confession. This time, even Nia Shubin's mother was filled with despair. With tears in her eyes, she said to Zheng Chengyue, "You've suffered for my son." But Zheng Chengyue's words made the elderly woman weep again. He said, "You've lost your son, I haven't suffered like you." Ma Yunlong also encouraged Nia Shubin's mother, hoping she wouldn't give up. Because now, nothing worse could happen. He said they surely couldn't pull your son out of the grave and execute him again, could they? It was precisely because they never gave up that this high wall was finally breached a year later. On December 4, 2014, the nation welcomed its first Constitution Day. The Nia Shubin case was once again thrust into the spotlight. This time, the Supreme Court aimed to break through local protectionism and prevent corruption in the judicial process. It instructed the Shandong High Court to review the Nia Shubin case in a different location. A decision will be made after the review based on the results whether to conduct a retrial of the Nia Shubin case. This is the first case in Chinese history to undergo a remote review. Remote review is crucial in the handling of wrongful convictions. The crime scene of the Nia Shubin case was in Hebei province. It has always been the Public Security Bureau, Procuratorate, and Court of Hebei province. In the handling of this case, this inevitably leads to some collusion among officials. Only a remote review can ensure the fairest and most just outcome. To reassess the Nia Shubin case, a very key piece of evidence emerged in this review. It turns out that Wang Shujin had disclosed a detail at the time of his arrest. A detail that had never been reported before. This detail was not even mentioned by Nia Shubin. He said that at the time of the incident, Kong Lan had a set of keys hanging from her arm. He casually threw them next to the body. And in the crime scene photos, there is indeed a set of keys. They are 30 centimeters away from the body. This is completely consistent with Wang Shujin's confession. This is exclusive evidence. With the emergence of this evidence, more and more dark secrets have been exposed. First, there is the absence of Nia Shubin's interrogation records. He was arrested on September 23, 1994. However, there were no interrogation records for a full 5 days. It wasn't until September 28 that the first guilty confession appeared. Did the investigators really not interrogate him during those first 5 days? According to the provisions of the criminal procedure law, whether it is a guilty or innocent confession, it should be recorded and collected, otherwise, it violates judicial procedures. In response, the Hebei police claimed that, generally, offenders do not confess in the initial stages. So, a breakthrough in confession after 5 days is quite normal. However, Nia Shubin mentioned multiple times in his guilty confession that what he was saying this time was true. What he said before was all false. It is clear that he had already made a confession prior to this. It was just deliberately concealed by the investigators. Furthermore, Nia Shubin mentioned the time of the crime 9 times after being brought in. There are 6 instances that are different. The police believe that Kong Lan's time of death was on August 5, 1994, at 5 p.m. However, according to Nia Shubin's supervisor's recollection, Nia Shubin was at work as usual that day. The factory is 5 kilometers from the crime scene. It takes 20 minutes to bike there. Moreover, the end of the workday is exactly at 5 p.m. Therefore, under any circumstances, Nia Shubin could not have arrived at the crime scene by 5 p.m. To determine whether Nia Shubin had the opportunity to commit the crime, the investigating police also obtained Nia Shubin's attendance record for the day of the incident. Nia Shubin's attendance record. However, the attendance record has not been returned to this day. This crucial piece of evidence also did not appear in the case file. Ultimately, after more than a year of evidence gathering, the Shandong High Court found that the evidence in the Nia Shubin case was insufficient and inaccurate. It could not rule out the possibility of another person being the perpetrator. It recommended that the Supreme Court initiate a trial supervision procedure to rehear the case. In 2016, the Supreme Court made a ruling stating that Nia Shubin's arrest was only due to the public reporting him as a suspected murderer. The investigating authorities had no evidence or clues of his crime. Moreover, the lack of testimonies from the first 5 days, and the exclusion of attendance records from the case file, all violated the proper judicial procedures. The authenticity and legality of the confession of guilt are in doubt. The statements were contradictory and inconsistent. The possibility of coerced confession cannot be ruled out. Therefore, Nia Shubin was ultimately declared innocent. The Nia family was awarded $2.68 million in state compensation. And on this day, it had been exactly 21 years since Nia Shubin was executed. It had been a full 21 years. Justice has come too late. My son's life cannot be brought back. After 21 years, do you think it was worth it? Today, we have an innocent verdict, and I think it was worth it. Looking back at this case, it is destined to become a milestone on the road of Chinese law. But such a milestone is also a pillar of shame. In the Nia Shubin case, we saw the evil of humanity. We also felt the goodness of humanity. In this long and arduous season, Ma Yunlong lost his job. Li Shuding's hair turned white. Meanwhile, Zheng Chengyue was also afflicted by serious illness. He passed away on May 5, 2022. He once told Nia Shubin's sister during his lifetime that after he passed away, a stone tablet should be erected next to Nia Shubin's grave. It should read, "The People's Police love the people." It is precisely because there are countless brave people like Zheng Chengyue that justice's light was able to penetrate this shroud of darkness.